Joining us now for more on this is Leland Miller. He's the president of the China Beige Book International. Leland, good to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
All right, Leland, at 7.4%, China's GDP is still amongst the fastest growing in the world, double that of the US, but it is the slowest rate in 24 years. So is this a concern? Is this the soft landing that we've been expected? Or is this just the new normal?
Well, I think the number is actually very predictable. At the end of the day, this is a political number as much as it is an economic number. And so you had 7.7% growth last year. You had a 7.5% GDP target. If the market saw 7%, they were going to get really upset. 7.2% experts were predicting. 7.3, 7.4 was really the only sweet spot, and that's what they hit.
So you're pretty comfortable with that growth rate. There are some very positive numbers in the report. Retail sales and industrial production accelerated in December from the prior year. Retail sales up 11.9% in December from a year before. Factory output up 7.9%. These are positives. What are the other positives that you see?
Well, our positives are quite different than others. I mean, when we look at China Beige Book data, it's done in real time. And whereas the GDP data that the Chinese provide, the official data, is always done with some sort of lag. So, you know, we've actually seen different positives and different negatives. One of the positives that we didn't see that the official data came out with was retail sales. We've actually seen that decrease 4 straight quarters. So this rebalancing mix that people talk about, where you're going to have more consumption and less investment. We're seeing the reduction in investment, but we're not seeing this bump up in consumption. So that's actually a concern.
You're not seeing the bump up in consumption because, as Yin Hang just said, consumption contributed to more than half of overall growth. It was up 3%. And the whole model is to now shift the economy to a consumer-based economy. Is this viable? Is this not working?
Well, you know, that's the model. That doesn't mean it's actually happening. So one of the things about Chinese data is, you know, you want to look at other data sources too. And one of the things that we're seeing is not that consumption isn't growing, but is the share of consumption growing sufficient to counterbalance the drop in investment? So you can actually have a robust economy through consumption and still not doing enough to counterbalance the drop in investment. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're not seeing rebalancing in place from the consumption side.
So you're concerned about the overall model, which is the basis of China's shift, which is a consumer-based economy now.
Well, we are, but it's interesting. You know, most people who operate in the marketplace have 6 or 5 or 8 data points they look at. We have hundreds. And so, for instance, we talk about rebalancing. I just gave you the negative. The positive here is that despite the fact that manufacturing has been relatively stable, you've had services do quite well. So you're seeing some sectoral rebalancing. So it's a mixed rebalancing picture. Retail is not picking it up, but a services industry, which is a higher margin industry, is. So, you know, rebalancing is more than more than one metric.
Well, you know, Leland, the growth forecasts from other organizations are pretty bleak for 2015. The IMF has China growing at 6.8%. Others have it even less. Oxford Economics predicts 6.5%. What is your outlook?
Well, there's no question there's a long-term deceleration. So, you know, you are seeing a slowdown. I think that most of these other models are trying to capitalize on sort of linear projection on a slowdown. The two questions are, one, will the Chinese government actually admit sub 7% growth? That's an open question. The second is acknowledging the fact that a slowdown means more than just dropping down every quarter. For instance, from Q2 to Q4 this year, even though 2014 slowed down, from second quarter to the fourth quarter, we actually saw some very positive movement in growth. We saw a positive profit performance. We saw good news in the labor market. So this is not all bad news. It's not a straight downhill line.
What do you think are the biggest challenges, though?
Well, you know, the consumption thing is one, but I think the bigger question is the credit environment. People don't have much data on the credit environment, what's happening, what are interest rates. But what we see in our data is that despite the fact that there's an enormous amount of liquidity being pumped out there, and more rumored because of the stimulus, we're not seeing small, medium-sized enterprises with sufficient access to capital. Now, most of them don't want to borrow, and they don't want to spend right now. But still, it's a very difficult problem when credit in the economy is not put into the hands of those who actually want to use it.
Well, Leland, you mentioned stimulus, and the big question is what will the People's Bank of China do in terms of stimulus? A lot of speculation that it will happen has already been priced in. What does China Beige Book predict?
Well, China Beige Book, 3 months ago, this is a very easy question, was saying the economic data absolutely does not justify it. They should not do it. What happens when they stimulate, as we saw with this last interest rate cut and everything that's happened in the second half of the year, is despite the fact that there's easing going on, the cost of capital is going up in the economy. So stimulus is not working. Now you're looking at deflationary headwinds. It's a much tougher choice for China. They still shouldn't do it, but it might be too much to resist.
So what should they be doing?
They should not stimulate. They should move to what they said they were going to do last year, and that is allow businesses to default, allow trust and other shadow products to default, allow risk to be injected into the system. Now, this means things will slow down, and this means there will be other problems, but it'll be for a much healthier economy and a much better growth rate, or much better, healthier growth rate going forward.
All right.